So we respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuhavut, and the Innu of Desinan, and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. Rob?
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Memorial University's 2018 Teaching and Learning Conference. I'm Rob Wells, Interim Director for the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, or CITL, and we're thrilled to be hosting this event. It's exciting to see such a great turnout from Memorial's teaching and learning community, and I extend a special welcome to those of you from the K-12 system, the college, and others who are able to join us here in person or by webcast. I should note that all keynotes and sessions in this room will be webcast and recorded. I'd also like to give a special thank you to our generous sponsors for the event, the Office of the Provost and VP Academic, D2L, and Teaching and Learning Canada. Before I invite our Provost up for her welcome and introduction, I'd like to take a safety moment to point out the exits here in the room. There are two up front and two in the back. And in case of an emergency or fire alarm, please make your way out through the closest exit and toward the muster station outside the front doors of this building in the parking lot just outside the main entrance. Now, it is my privilege to introduce our Provost and Vice President Academic, Dr. Noreen Golfman, an experienced academic and administrator in senior leadership roles in higher education. Dr. Golfman is the university's Chief Academic Officer with overall responsibility for all academic matters. This includes the development and delivery of programs to more than 18,000 undergraduate and graduate students. Throughout her various roles at Memorial and in her work outside our campuses, it is evident that Dr. Golfman is a proponent of excellent teaching and student success. As such, it is very fitting that she addressed you all this morning. So, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Noreen Golfman.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, friends and colleagues, former students, I'm sure, are in the room too. I've been around long enough that there are probably more of you than I know. And I hope I gave you high B's or A's in any English class. That's the only way I know that at least, you know, you've stayed in the game. You're still here and maybe even making eye contact with me. That would be great. And thank you, Rob. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that Rob is in his last few days at Memorial University. It's pretty astonishing to think about that. Rob is retiring and going off into his next adventure, set of adventures and chapters. And I can say personally and on behalf of Memorial how grateful we are for all of Rob's contributions through the years. Certainly working with first DELTS and then, of course, in its transformed incarnation with CITL, a Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. And Rob has stepped in as acting director more than once, and always cheerfully. I'm going to miss our weekly, or they're not weekly, they're monthly. Time flies quickly. We see each other often enough. Our monthly meetings, where we just catch up, we do a lot of gossip about town, and that's part of course, the foundational philosophy of conversation, knowing where everybody is and what everybody's doing and where everybody's going and what they aspire to be. So I just want to ask you to join me in thanking Rob heartily on behalf of this teaching community. So stay close. And there's an event for him on Friday, which I'm sure many of you will be going to celebrate and acknowledge. I'll be out of town, unfortunately, but I know that our lines of communication will stay fluid. I do have to step out after just bringing a few words to you of welcome, because the president's away this week. Part of the burden of office is stepping in for him while I'm doing what I'm doing, and then I have to catch a plane to Halifax for some meetings. So it's just like that. And it frankly kind of bums me out, because I'm looking at this program. It is so rich and so fabulous, particularly the opening plenary session with 3 deans, I think, who are in the room. Really curious to hear what they have to say, of course. And all the other concurrent sessions. Very, very rich, I think, representation of so much of the great activity that's going on already at Memorial, and so much about what we want to happen here. The theme, of course, is transformation, and I guess one is always in that process of transforming from one thing to another in post-secondary education. But the size of this group, the number of registrants, indicates a degree to which there is a hunger for more of these conversations at a very high level, but also with the intention of following up, of acting on the ideas, I hope, and the inspiration that comes from all of your conversations. So I look forward to hearing from the organizers, especially a lot more about how the next few days go, what the plenaries were like, particularly remiss that I'm not going to hear them. Dr. David Helfin, who's here from Quest, or will be, and John Baker, a proud Newfoundlander, of course, founder of D2L, who we worked with over the years, and on whose services we are so dependent, actually. And I'm sure he'll be inspiring. I've heard him speak many times. Just a few words then before I introduce the opening plenary. This is really about the nuts and bolts of where I see we are with teaching and learning on this campus from a very practical, but I hope enabling perspective. As you know, we had the first teaching and learning framework launched in 2011. That's many, many ages ago. And time indeed does fly. And I wouldn't say it expired so much as it reached the end of its projected application in about mid-2017. So we're now in 2018, and since then what has happened has been a lot of discussion and talk led by several committees as to how to indeed transform that document and that framework to a next level, to another iteration, to take Memorial even further in our aspirations to be delivering the absolutely best teaching, not just in the region, but in all of Canada, really, to be world leaders, and to see ourselves as bound to best practices for learning for our students and our community. And my intention was always to galvanize as much support as possible to make that second iteration of our framework as bold, as creative, as dazzling as possible. And I think we're there, frankly. Over the next few weeks, most of you will see, all of you will be alerted to the fact that the teaching and learning framework is ready. It's ready to launch. It'll be covering the once approved, I hope by Senate, period from now, 2018, out to another 5 years. And because time flies, we have to start moving quickly on many of the initiatives that are outlined in that document. Some things will have changed from the first framework, and there's a whole bunch of new stuff in there. So I won't go into detail about all of that or steal the thunder of its initial exposure, but I do want to acknowledge Rob Shea, I think is in the room, who led the first committee, or really the only committee that we struck to review the first framework, to determine the degree to which that framework was successful, achieved its goals, and if not, where we could improve and take it forward. And Rob led in deep consultations, I'm sure all of you fed into it, several months ago, really at the end of last spring, I think, and then on through the summer, that consultation with his committee. And that draft report led to further discussions with members of CITL, Kim Myrick in particular, and a whole bunch of other people who are engaged, many of them in this room, about how to take that report that Rob and his team produced transform it into the T&L framework 2.0, let's call it. And that's where we are. So I'm extremely excited about that. I will say that one thing about it that complements the activity here quite directly, and it has to do with the transformation again of the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, CITL. The document spends considerable amount of space laying the foundation for not so much reimagine, but a animated and enhanced CITL structure, really underscoring the need to have a home for teaching and learning. Of course, the home is, at least technically, it's the Office of the Provost and VP Academic, but another site on campus where the ownership, let's say, and leadership for that framework really should rest. As you know, we're looking for a new director to be part of that transformation or transformational activity, and that process is in stride now. And we are looking really for somebody, probably a god or goddess, some challenging set of tasks that person will have to assume, but nonetheless, we know that we will find the right person to help lead the unit towards not just implementing that framework, but really imagining CITL as the place where people will reflexively go and know that they will not only get advice and instruction or help and support, but also feed into the larger conversation, such as the one we're having here over the next few days, about what Memorial should really be doing and how we can step up to provide the absolutely best learning environment for our students. So you'll hear more about that. Of course, it involves integrating the unit more into other levels of the university and other activities where that kind of integration will be complementary and advance this mission of what the T&L framework really is going to be recommending. So that's just a heads up about that. It's a really important piece, I think, of the framework, and I wish the timing had been that we could all be discussing it here, but you've got other things to talk about. And I think if there is stuff that comes out in the next 2 days, maybe recurring themes that really stress the need for Memorial taking a certain direction or investing in a certain area of teaching and learning, that teaching and learning document will be, or that framework will be fluid. It won't be set in concrete. It is malleable and open to tweaking or change or accommodation. So just ask you to keep that in mind over the next few days, and certainly when you actually read the document itself. Other pieces will embrace what is ongoing right now, that is a indigenization strategy for Memorial. That's going to be a long process of consultation both within and beyond the community. But the T&L framework underscores as well the need to be thinking about, even if we don't know yet how, indigenizing our curriculum in some ways across the board. So that's, for example, another piece of it. And other exciting projects. So stay tuned for that. I would say that in the dark days of budget cuts and the grim day-to-day of what my office often has to deal with, it is that whole area, that whole file on teaching and learning, on the new framework, on the emergence, I would say, of a new, I don't want to say brand, but let's say notionally new theme an emphasis for CITL that really has kept me going. And I hope it does sustain us all through the next little while we deal with, some tough choices we have to make at Memorial. Certainly, it is this file, this framework that we are absolutely committed to improving. So wherever possible, we will be preserving the integrity of that mission and that important framework. That's really all I have to say, except good luck with the next few days. Thanks to the organizers and everybody who volunteered to participate on all the panels. Anybody watching or listening from away, I hope you stay close to this exercise of the next few days and feed into it as much as possible. Transformation is a pretty challenging perspective, and it's even harder to do when I think we're facing, lots of challenges on our resources. So never mind all of that. Think big, think bold, think aspirational, and again, I look forward to hearing everything that comes out of all of this. It is my pleasure to introduce the first keynote. I'm sure familiar to most of you. That's Dr. Danny Dyer. He's many things. He's an icon, really, of teaching and learning at this university, that's for sure. He is easily recognizable. None of this is in my notes, I should say. He's a larger-than-life force for teaching and learning at this university, I would say. The notes do say he's an associate professor in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics in the Faculty of Science. He has served as chair in teaching and learning in the Faculty of Science for the last several years. He's a recipient of Memorial University's President's Award for Distinguished Teaching. That was in 2016. And the Association of Atlantic University's Distinguished Teaching Award in 2017. The note says Dr. Dyer enjoys teaching. That's pretty obvious. I know he does. And he's always trying new approaches to encourage his students' learning. I know I participate in the Shad Valley, the Shad program at Memorial every year. It's the 1 hour of my life in the year that I get to actually talk to students as a group in some kind of teaching capacity. That's the part about the job that I miss most, of course. But Danny, of course, is a very active volunteer with that program as well, just another indication of the range of all that he does and he gives to Memorial. So it is my great pleasure to welcome icon, characteristically wild-haired, hirsute Dr. Danny Dyer to this august body.
Thank you very much, Dr. Golfman, for a very lovely introduction. I wrote those notes, though, so take it with a grain of salt. I'm really happy to be here. I do really enjoy talking about teaching. I guess I'm kicked in. I'm wired for sound now. Should I turn off that mic there? Does it matter? Okay. I really like being in this room again. I do talk about Shad things in here, but I also talk calculus in here very regularly. Though to be honest, the room was only slightly more filled than it is now. I used to teach one of these early morning, 9 o'clock in the morning sections, and people don't drag themselves in for calculus very much often. So I guess as the first speaker, I will stop and say, first, please join me in thanking CITL and all the organizers for putting this together, because I think this was a pretty great event. And I'm also looking forward to seeing all the talks as they go on. Now I should get my clicker going here. So I'm a mathematician. I'm interested in teaching, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I don't always have a lot of background in teaching, So there's oftentimes there's language which is strange to me. It happens a lot. So when I saw the transformational learning was going to be the big thing here. I said, well, I'll pack that in there. Transforming teaching for transformative learning. I was trying for a third one, but I couldn't make it. But I did put this in because that this is what, especially when it comes to educational technology. What else could you talk about? I'm a big Transformers fan, I guess. I watched the cartoon back in the day, so this is all I could think about when I was asked to do this. But I want to talk a little bit about, sort of my own relationship with teaching, just to get things going. Only one time, right? It's too annoying to do it more than once, right? I was an undergraduate here at Memorial, right? So I'm just from CBS, I'm not from town originally, but I live in town now, if we're worried about town locations. I was always sort of interested in teaching, and when I had the opportunity, I started teaching right away. I actually taught here at MUN the summer after I got my bachelor's degree, before I started graduate school. I had to cancel class to go to convocation one day, right? So at the time, I thought that was the coolest thing ever, that I was being allowed to teach a math course. And I still think it's pretty cool, right? I love mathematics, right? Absolutely 100%. And I'm always amazed that, we're all essentially here because we have some, keen obsession to some little tiny piece of, esoteric knowledge. But man, don't we want to talk about it all the time, right? Shouldn't we love teaching? It always fun and strange when I have colleagues who don't. I was lucky in mathematics. It's not 100% that you're going to get to teach as a graduate student, but it's not unknown either. So that's not sort of atypical. Our own department always tries to make sure that there are teaching opportunities available for graduate students. So if someone is interested in doing a per-course appointment at some point, they can get the chance. And increasingly, when people are looking for jobs in mathematics, one of the things you'll be asked for is a statement of teaching philosophy, and people will look at what teaching experience you have. I started at MUN in 2005. I was just a contract guy back then. I was regular term appointment, so the expectation of research was there, but I was only on a 3-year contract. Luckily, I got converted, and I've survived since then, And so I taught a lot, and then eventually I started to get more into thinking about my teaching, you want to do a good job, right? This is, depending on who you're talking to, between 30 and 40% of my job as a professor is supposed to be teaching. I want to do that well. If I'm going to skimp, I'll skimp on the service, right? Right? One less committee, who cares, right? But, the interaction you have with students is an important thing, right? And I wanted to try to do a good thing, good job. So I was very lucky. I got to be part of the project Engage in Teaching that ran here for, I think it ran here for 2 years. I was one of the 2 classes where I got a chance to go in and redevelop some of my coursework, right? And so I decided to redevelop the course that I actually taught in this room, right? The Calculus 1, our sort of first-year calculus course. And I really enjoyed it. I got to work with Anna Rissanen, who's out west now, and Amy Todd, who I saw walk into the room somewhere. Oh, there she is there. Who did a fantastic job in helping me really redesign that course. I got to do this teaching skills enhancement program. I would recommend that to anybody. I would say that in terms of my own teaching, I would guess around 50% of it was completely useless, right? But that's not a bad ratio. Right? I'm a big believer in disciplinarity, right? As a mathematician, I don't think I can show up and tell anyone else how they should be teaching, except possibly about mathematics, right? And people say, oh, well, it's a science, it's what, but my science is very different than physics, right? Physics is a lab science, right? a lot of time is spent in a lab and thinking about stuff, right? It's very different than biology or something, right? Biology, they've got animals, for God's sake, right? I don't touch anything alive for the most part, right? Maybe it's closer to philosophy, right? I mean, there's a lot of sort of meant to be very deep thought about, esoteric things sometimes. But we have this, we go through this very logical process of proof. That's what, like, I can't publish a paper until I can prove something, until I know that there's something which is like an absolute truth in the world. And philosophers are not keen on finding absolute truth, right? I mean, that's the last paper then, right? You can't, you can't publish anything. So I would recommend Teaching Skills Enhancement Program, run out of CITL. I was a big fan. I enjoyed it a lot. And I've been involved with Teaching and Learning Framework in different ways. I was a chair for the Faculty of Science and Teaching and Learning, which was a great experience. I got to talk to a lot of people about teaching and had a lot of time to actually think about my own teaching. But there was also some teaching and learning fun projects and that kind of stuff. And of course, and here we are, right? Because I think, this is in some sense a culmination of some of the teaching and learning framework that we're having these events, and I think it's fantastic. So that's my own background sort of with teaching. Okay, so transformative learning. I mean, I really grappled with this, right? So first off, I don't give a lot of keynotes. And when I do, I don't give a lot of keynotes in things outside of mathematics, right? When it comes to graph theory, I could talk a long time. So when I looked at this and I said, oh man, I better really stop and think about what this is all about, transformative learning. And I've got to say that philosophically, I think learning at all is hard, right? I mean, I tell students that, right? When they come into this classroom and I'm talking to them about, Calculus 1, I mean, I cannot speak to other disciplines, but you learn mathematics by doing mathematics. And I try to convince my students that, my lecture is only going to be a little tiny part of it, right? This time that we get to spend together is only a small portion of it. And I try to spend a lot of time convincing students to walk away and do mathematics so they can try to learn it. But I think learning really anything is hard, I'm a very unhandy man. And I've been, slowly, replacing my basement. And this has been a very steep learning curve for me, right? I mean, tearing things out and putting things down. Luckily, I have friends around who will help me. Part of the reason I think learning is hard, for the individual, period, it's hard to get that information in there. But then you have people like us who somehow stand up and do a little dance or something. And as we do this dance, we're supposedly trying to make something happen inside someone else's brain, right? That's what teaching is sort of about. And well, of course, what a miserable job, right? I mean, I can throw something across the room. I don't think I could hit that red thing over there, but give me enough chances, I'd get good at it, right? I could practice myself to the point where I could learn to throw well. But if Rob has got to talk me through it, now, Danny, lift your leg up a little bit more this time, I mean, that's going to be a tricky thing. And so I think teaching is also really hard. But the big thing that we have going for us is that we can control the teaching. Like, if we're the ones in front of the classroom, we get to decide what we're going to say or how we're going to say it or anything else. And that's the big advantage, right? So I want to talk a bit more about teaching. And so that's why we should talk about transformational teaching instead of transformational learning. We all sometimes have this like Saul on the road to Damascus moment, right? The lightning bolt, woof, right? The scales fall from your eyes. You see what's happening, right? But how can I make that happen to you, right? That's tough, but we can try. So, controversial slide. Most teaching is not transformational, right? I mean, okay, so I don't know how many people are here. 100? I'll be optimistic. I'll say there's 100. Yeah, so there we go, 100 for sure. I got the thumbs up from the back of the room. I teach first year calculus, but I've even taught our pre-calculus. I've taught our algebra and trigonometry course, right? We used to teach some programming courses and this kind of stuff. And some of this stuff is just service teaching, right? Like I'm not teaching future mathematicians, or at least not even close to exclusively when I'm teaching in my first year classroom, right? I'm teaching, almost every other discipline, right? Certainly engineering, business, anywhere in the science, they all require calculus. It's just a fact of life. A lot of people who come in to do a BA, they have this numeracy requirement. They still fall into the 1090, 1000 stream. Similarly for education, even though there's a stream 1050, 1051 in mathematics, many people just do math 1000 instead. Right? I mean, ultimately, there's a number of math courses or numeracy that are required. So, I'm not teaching for me or to service my future discipline or something, lofty. I'm teaching because someone says this student has to do this course. Right? I think they should. Don't get me wrong. I think a little smattering of mathematics is a great thing. But that's part of what I do. And it's part of what you do. Right? We're often going to teach people who are not our own students. And sometimes we're even gatekeepers, right? Like, I keep a lot of people out of business and engineering. Right? It's a required course, right? And if I fail you, I say, sorry, you're not going to get a chance to do this year, right? And then our poor old undergraduate officer gets a phone call of how what a jerk I am, I almost said something worse, but I'm being recorded now, so. Okay, so we also have that role, right? That's something that happens when we're teaching. We're gatekeepers sometimes as well. And it's worth acknowledging, I mean, maybe not for you guys, but certainly for me, oftentimes people don't want to be there. And I hope that's not just my classroom, but they often sort of resent the fact that there's this hurdle. And I certainly have a lot of students who just look at the university degree as some collection of hurdles that they have to overcome. Right? So, trying to have a transformative moment for them is rough. Right? So you have to think about why they're there and what they expect. We used to say for some courses, you just want to have 5.0 and go. Right? You want to get your pass and you're through. Right? You can go on with the rest of your life. Right? I had a buddy who didn't get a high enough, mark in phys chem or something in second year, and that was it. He decided he wasn't going to do medicine. That was gone out of his life because his mark wasn't high enough. He had very different expectations than someone who's just saying, I need to get this course, I need to pass so I can graduate, so I can move on with my life. And we don't talk about it a whole lot, but people have different abilities. Right? I mean, I will tell you 100% in my Math 1000 Calculus 1 classroom, I have students that I do not think will ever get Math 1000. They won't pass it. They won't get their 5.0. They will not go. Right? I mean, partly the university, we're a single university province. We have an obligation to try to slather on some teaching, some higher learning to anyone who wants to give it a shot. And I think that's a very reasonable thing. But it doesn't mean that everyone who jumps over that first hurdle is going to be able to get a degree. I'm not getting into admissions or anything like that, right? That's a tough fight, right? But, it's just a fact. People are not always going to be able to have these incredible moments of transformative learning. And for me, at least, I can't teach students who aren't there, right? So first-year classes, at least particularly in mathematics, all I can really speak to, there's days, well, I mean, I guess 50%, in middle semester, right? I'm looking at some of my colleagues here, Beth Ann and Margot, who also teach mathematics. 50% is probably very fair in a first-year classroom mid-February. And if they're not there, what can I do? Right? I mean, if I'm going to try to do something to let them have transformational learning, I need some kind of interaction. And if I'm not going to have that kind of interaction, that's it. I'm not really part of the game anymore. Okay, so, people come back at me and say, oh yeah, but you're spoiled, right? Your idea of this large first-year classroom. In mathematics, a class of this room could be full. 280 people, I think, is capacity for this room. That could be a first-year mathematics classroom. And so people will say, oh, well, that's not really the kind of teaching I do. And so, this this guy up in the front is talking about this, but his experience is totally divorced from my own, right? Now, we also teach really small classes in mathematics, because some of our senior level courses are essentially only for honor students. Occasionally, some just major wanders in one way or another. So in the fall, I think I taught 10 people. That was in a third-year course. A couple of years ago, my record, I had a course that started with 2. That was a fourth-year course, and one of those students dropped out. So I ended up with one student. So there, you may be thinking at least, there's the opportunity for a transformational learning experience, right? And maybe it is. I will certainly agree that you have an awful lot of interaction when you're teaching a small class, right? Now, you can't make people do it, right? I've had people who have been in this classroom and they especially requested I kept that seat free because they had social anxiety, and if the crowd in the room got to be too much, they wanted to be able to run out, right? And it doesn't matter how big the room is. You know, if you have 5 or 6 people, it seems like everything should be really pleasant and formal. But some people, if you even get the impression that you might ask them a question, you can just, you can see them tense up. So there's more of a chance for individual interactions, but you can't guarantee it. And I sometimes have more transformative experiences in my big classes. Partially because I think the ideas are easier, right? The things I'm trying to communicate in a first-year mathematics class, I mean, in the overall scale of things, they're a lot easier to get than the ideas in the 4th year. Hopefully, by the time you hit the 4th year, people have sort of got their lives together. They know how to do the whole university thing. But then the mathematical ideas are more tricky. And I'm sure for your disciplines it's the same thing. Like as you go on, things get tough. The early stuff can be tough for different reasons. But sometimes I love when I have a student and I've managed to somehow cajole or trick or lure them into my office during my office hours, And they can finally say, I've had a real problem with number 3. And I can say, oh, number 3, oh, sit down, let's talk about number 3, And we can stop and we can, and I can get Socratic and I can say, oh, how do you do number 3? And I can say, well, we know we'll start like this. What do you think the next step should be? What else could I say? Or can you tell me the definition of this thing? And you can try to draw an answer out of them there in the room. And then you can see, like when the cartoon light bulb goes on. I mean, that's the best feeling in the world. And I would say that is an example of transformational learning. Like this person has learned something themselves, they've gotten it, it's clicked. And those eureka moments, or as a friend of mine said, it's like when to totally change genres, it's when the ponies get their cutie mark. For anyone who has a child who's a Friendship is Magic fan, right? And they learn something fundamental about themselves, whammo, right? The cutie mark comes out. I find that sometimes easier in an early classroom, right? Just the way it happens. The last thing I have there, you can make a genuine human connection with someone, and it doesn't mean it's a transformational learning experience. This person can become, you can be a mentor to them, they can be a buddy, they can be whatever, right? Hey, get married, I don't care, right? I mean, after the course is over. But that doesn't mean that learning happened, right? And it doesn't mean that something transformational happened, right? So in the class where I had 2 students, they were not strong students, either one of them. And so I ran that as an actual sort of, I'm going to lecture this class. I'm not going to run this as some sort of seminar course where I say, go away and read chapter 1 and then come back. Because I just didn't think it would work. And halfway through the semester, one of the students was failing pretty badly. And I let them know, and they decided to drop the course. And the other guy stuck around. And he stuck around the whole semester. He only missed 1 class. But that was a weird class, because, I'm just standing in front of the room. Is this guy, is he coming today? But at the end of it, At the very last lecture, I'm saying, so, this is what the final exam is going to look like. Make sure you do these problems that from the last, like we didn't have an assignment, but these are problems you'll need to know. The end. So the student says to me, hey, you want to see something cool? And I'm like, well, this is a public place. I'm probably pretty safe. And so he's one of these guys. He's a hoodie guy, So he's got like the hoodie on, from beside the jacket. He came in, comes off, take off the jacket, but he's still got the hoodie there. And so I'm okay, sure, I'll see something cool. And he undoes his hoodie, and he's got like a T-shirt on underneath, so it's not that kind of story. But he also has a great big lizard, and it's around as big as my forearm, sitting there on his chest. And he says, this is Ouija. And I said, oh, that's Ouija, how nice, And I say, like short for Luigi? Oh, yeah, short for Luigi. I say, oh, and he says, yeah, he helps me when I get anxious. Like he's my companion lizard. And I say, that's pretty cool. I said, can I pet him? He said, yeah, that's fine, you can pet him. So I steeled myself and I went over and petted him, right? That's when I lost this finger, no. And I said, so he's been with you sometimes during the semester? He says, yeah, I wear him when I'm getting anxious, and it helps keep me calm. I know he's there. And I said, he just sits there? Oh, yeah, he's just warm. Like, I keep the hoodie done up, and he's nice and warm, and he's content, and that's it, And that was very much a very human connection, right? This person shared something very private and personal with me, and I was, I get a bit weepy. I'm a soppy guy, right? I mean, even thinking about it, right? I mean, but he barely scraped through that course, right? I mean, and I'm not saying I don't know what the reasons were, I don't know, it's like, oh, I just barely got him through. That's not the narrative I'm trying to sell here. What I'm saying is, I don't think I helped this guy to any transformational learning. Right? I think we had a lovely human moment, but that's it. I don't think I changed this guy's view of mathematics and the world and, Dead Poets Society. I'm up on a desk talking to this guy. I just don't think it happened. And so those things are great. I enjoy it, right? But they're not necessarily transformational learning, and they're not necessarily transformational teaching. Right? I don't think I did my best job in teaching that course. It was too small. It was too strange. It was weird. Right? And I to be honest, I thought they were a weak class. Right? And I was worried about getting them through and not necessarily about inspiring them when it comes to mathematics. Right? So that was on my mind. Okay. So this is my exciting flow chart. I think maybe the best thing we can try is to change our teaching in a way that we can try to set people up for transformative learning. Maybe that's the best we can try. All right? I mean, again, because it comes back to my idea that I'm just working with what I can do and that I can't fundamentally make things happen inside your brain. So if you're going to think about transforming your teaching, and I've done some of this, so I've thought about it a lot, I have some suggestions. First off, think about who you're teaching. Now again, this is through my mathematical bias and being in a first-year classroom where I teach a whole bunch of students. Your mileage may vary. Think about how much of this you want to take home. But some of this will definitely be true. For me, many students that I'm going to teach are not going to graduate. But they're not going to finish any degree. And even the ones who do will not necessarily finish the degree they start off with. Right? So people will change a lot while they're here. The ones who do graduate, like I say, I do a lot of service teaching. I'm not necessarily teaching just the mathematicians in a classroom. There's going to be a lot of other people who are going to be in that room. Of those, even the ones who do mathematics, like most of them are not going to go on and say, you know, I want to go to graduate school. I'm going to do higher mathematics, you know. And of those, right, I mean, we know what the hiring rates are like, right? They're terrible, right? Most of those people will not even become permanent academics. So the big thing that I try to remember is I'm not teaching me. And that's a trap we fall into, right? Like you think about what I would have loved if a professor did this, you know, but we have a lot of people who are just hurdlers, right? This course is just one more annoyance before they go on and start their job and do whatever, you know? And that's it, right? That's just life. And so when you're thinking about what you're going to do to change your teaching, you should think about who you're trying to reach out to, right? If you're going to transform something yourself to have an effect, think about who you want to affect. I don't particularly care, you know, if the Board of Trade thinks we have a skills gap. That's not a big concern in my life, you know. But it's worth thinking about the people in the room, what they want out of being in the room. And so I think it's worth thinking about who you're teaching. I think if you're going to do big changes, change something that you already know pretty well. So like when I picked the course where I made big dramatic changes in, I changed my Calculus 1 course. First off, because I didn't think the material I didn't find the material very challenging anymore. I did go through a point where, you know, as I taught, I learned more about first-year calculus. And having a PhD, I'm not ashamed to admit that when I went back and looked at some of these ideas that I hadn't looked at for years, it's like, I learned things. There's better ways to think about things. There's different ways to think about things. But it's definitely good if you're going to transform something to have a base to work from. You know, I've requested a brand new course for fall 2018. You know, it's Calculus 2. But I haven't taught integration in a million years. Right? I haven't taught integration. I haven't ever taught integration. And it's a pretty fundamental thing, you know, but I last did it in a room like this, you know, 20 years ago. So I'm not going to go in and try to reinvent, this is going to be incredible. Watch the fireworks. They're going to show up when Dr. Dyer walks into this classroom. You know, I'm going to teach a pretty bog standard course until I'm comfortable again with the material, and then I'll try to do things that I think should be there. One big thing, if you change something you know, it'll become less boring. All right, so I taught Calculus 1 in a room like this one 5 times in a row. All right, and it drove me crazy by the end of it, right? It was one of these, like, you know, I'm going to chew my leg off to try to escape this trap. So going through this change made it way more palatable for me, right? It was something different, even though, I mean, the course has to be taught. Like, you know, what are you going to do? But going through the process of thinking about things and changing things, I mean, that was wonderful. It made me think about it in a different way, and I enjoyed teaching it a lot more. So I think one big benefit is that you will certainly have things become less boring. Now, like, you know, here's the warning. Like, it takes a lot of time. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but Albert, I mean, you can correct me on this one. I think with Project Engage, we got a teaching remission. Yeah, so, I mean, hey, that was a big deal, right? I had one less course to teach in doing my preparation for my big Math 1000 course, right? I mean, I guess it's a monetary way of support, but in some ways it's a really nice non-monetary way. Like, you know, a lot of cash is not changing hands somehow. But it made a big deal. It made a big difference for me. So when I redid this course, I'd taken my existing course notes and I transformed them into fill-in-the-blank course notes. You know, so I would give these out to students, and it would be nice typewritten things where I'd have definitions, and I'd state problems, but the solutions wouldn't be there. And then in class, I would break out the old document camera, and I would actually do the solution, because I think you learn mathematics, right, by doing it. You know, and that was useful, and I still wanted to show students the process of doing mathematics. But even though I was working from existing course notes, it took time to prep that. It took time to prep problem sets that we were going to do in class. That was the whole reason I was doing this. I wanted to make time in class for students to work on problems. And then when it's all done, even though it's, it should be trivial, I actually had to go and actually scan the darn things when I was finished and post them online too, so if someone missed a day. Like, they're all small things, but I had to do that after every single class. You forget, you get busy, you have to rush to do something else. It takes time. I gave longer projects, rather than just like math weekly assignment, totally standard. Even in a higher level course, you probably go to bi-weekly. Maybe by the time you get to like the 4th year, you give problems every 3 weeks, an assignment every 3 weeks instead. In my first year calculus, I decided I was going to try to get at some of the deeper topics. It wasn't just going to be, here's a problem, learn how to repeat the problem. I wanted to sort of scratch at the surface of the meaning behind some of the stuff I was trying to get these guys to work with. And so I had to create some new projects. I called them, short projects instead of assignments. And I'd give them a couple of weeks to work on these things. And answers would not be immediately visible. They would have to reflect and play with things and work on them. But then I had to mark them, right? So, when you decide to do something extra, you have to deal with the consequences of that. And that takes time. Technology always takes longer to set up than you think. That's why it's great that all the technology in this room was set up when I just walked in here. But it's even true, so I started to do videos. And I use a simple little app on my iPad, which just lets me have my voice and sort of what I write. It's like a whiteboard with voice. It's called Show Me. It's very simple. And that's why I picked it. It was really simple. But of course, I'd be recording something and I'd realize, oh man, I screwed this up. Like, that's the wrong answer. Like, it's back there. Okay, scrap that, start again. And you're working in your office and you're doing this, and then someone comes and knocks on the door. And like, everything takes longer to do than you think it's going to do. Poor old Pam Phillips, we redesigned a distance course, a group of us. My God, it took us, 3 years, Pam, before the darn thing was finished? I was trying to get a group of 3 or 4 academics together to do some teaching videos and problem videos. Good God, right? It's like parting the Red Sea, trying to get us to do something, right? It was like that old cat herding commercial. That's what Pam was like. Pam was one of these cat boys that goes around trying to get us in the right spot. God bless you. Anyway, Pam. But it takes a long time to do it and get it to a level. And I wasn't working for perfection, right? I was working for good enough, but it still takes a long time. And one of the sort of, the bonuses, the things you want, is you want people to come and interact with you. But the problem is, sometimes they do. And so if you stop and you have office hours, oh, this is lovely. I have this time. I'm going to be in my office. I'll stop. I'll get my notes written up. I'll work on a paper or something. They may actually show up and ask you questions sometimes, right? God forbid, you get a lineup, right? Lineups happened. And it's like, oh, just thinking, that's not getting done today, so move on. So whatever you're going to do, just be aware. Like, in the process of doing this, there are some things you have to pay. Maybe not be a lot of money, but time is the one that will come up. Here's the really scary one, right? It might not work, right? So when I started the whole Project Engage and I wanted to redo my Math 1000 class, I wanted more people to pass. Like, that was it, right? So these are so this is all the times I taught Calculus 1. Those are the midterm grades. Will they show up? These are the midterm grades here. Midterm 1, midterm 2, the final exam, and the final overall. We normally write with a 60%, sometimes 55% final in mathematics. This is the failure rate, and just for laughs, here is the CEQ, overall, how would you rate the quality of this professor, right? So when I was doing this, I started off low. Oh, I got better. Oh, This is when boredom, I guess. So that's all I'll say. Boredom is setting in, especially in the early ones, the thing you can notice is the more people fail, the better I do in CEQs. You know, I don't really understand it, but so the failure rate, though, that's what I really wanted to change. And so these early 5 were the pre-change, and then it was afterwards. Now, so fundamentally, the failure rate did not go down, you know, and that was a failure for me, right? When you look at this and you even do some quick approximations, you might say, actually, it looks like the failure rate went up a lot, right? It's not just because I'm a terrible teacher and everything I suggest was a bad idea. The Newfoundland high school curriculum changed at the same year that I did my changes. And so anyone who did calculus could actually hop over my course. So essentially, all the best students in high school got to leave my course altogether and go on to a subsequent course. So one of the really fundamental things that changed is that my cohort is not quite the same cohort in these things. But, you know, I mean, these are the facts. This is still what happened, right? I wanted to reduce my failure rate, and after this time and thought and work, I did not. And I still haven't. It wasn't just because it was new and I didn't know about it. Like, they still haven't gone down. The numbers here are generally crummier, but again, I think some of that's a cohort issue, right? The best students are not landing in my class at all anymore. Students that I would have once certainly expected to see there. My CEQs are generally up, and that sort of reflects the feedback I get from students. They like this new approach, right? So I've transformed this, I've changed it. We do an awful lot of time in class with them working on problems and me wandering around, like talking to them, you know, and I will, like I'll come up and I'll say, oh, hey there, Elsa, what are you working on? You know, you got this started yet? No, okay. Because, you know, the students who learn they do not want to interact with me move to the center of the room. Anyone else is fair game. But I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, right, from this. And to be honest, I like it a lot more, right? For me, personally, it makes a big difference, right? I have a much better chance, even in a room of like 80 students, that's what my 100-person class gets whittled down to normally. I know their names. No, it's always easy to know, like, oh, you know, cell phone girl sits there, behind her is death metal t-shirt guy, you know, like we all get used to that, right? But beyond that, I know, you know, that's Mary on her cell phone all the time. And that's a level of intimacy that is the human connection that I actually really enjoy and I find personally very satisfying. It hasn't paid off for me, not as much as I'd like at the very least, but it makes the actual teaching much easier for me, much more pleasant. Okay, so before I quit, I will stop and say that, you know, part of the reason I come to this is I like going to things like this so I can think about things that I might do with my teaching. You know, that's why I like these whole events. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things you might try, ways that you might try to transform things. But the idea is these are cheap ways to do it, right? And I mean cheap in every sense, right? Hopefully you're not going to, you know, spend 15, 20 hours working on individual little videos that you're going to try to post on a website someplace. Like that was a big cost. I'm not talking about that. I want something that you can just sort of grab and say, hey, can I just throw this into my teaching? So, when you're setting up your midterms, make sure you set it up with some possibility for revising. Now, I mean this in a really particular way. So I give my midterm, it's at like 11 o'clock on Wednesday. And of course, at least for math tests, what happens is everyone writes the test. I finally grab the last few papers out of someone's hand, and then they all stand outside the room talking about, you know, what did you get for number 5? Did you get number 5? You got 7? Oh, I got 6, you know? And that's it, right? That's what happens. So I allow students to pick one question and revise it, but it happens immediately. It happens immediately after the test. So I give the test, I post it online, and they can resubmit one question right away. They had with 24 hours to actually go through and do this. And so the idea, of course, this is my jargon. I'm taking summative evaluation and turning it into formative evaluation, right? So you hang around long enough, you pick up some of the lingo, right? Right? But students are, I really believe students are never more receptive to learning how to do something than when it's just shown up on a test, right? And so, I mean, what do? Do they cheat? Oh my God, they cheat like crazy, right? I expect them to cheat. I expect them to go talk to each other. I expect them to go talk to the help center. They can even come talk to me. I had a lovely time. One student came to me and she said, you know, I had problems with both of these questions, and I've got solutions written up for both of them, you know, correct solutions. Which one do you think will be better to hand in? Oh, we had a great discussion because we talked about, like, where did you go wrong in this question? Now, I hadn't marked her paper yet. I hadn't seen it. You know, that was all in the future. She said, well, I got around here on this question, but here I got down further. Now, I said, well, that's probably worth 1 mark in this question. This question you got a bit further. Well, that's probably worth 3 marks. That's 3 marks of a 4-point question. This one is only 1 mark of a 5-point question. And we got to, not only had this student gone and done the work, we got to have a sort of an in-depth talk about what was important in the question, where the marks would be located, what she had gotten right and what she'd gotten wrong. My God, that was fantastic, right? That was way more interaction about a topic than I get with most of my students ever. So it's nice and it's relatively cheap, right? I give the maximum. Some of my colleagues said you should always take the second question, even if it's worse. And I say, no, I'm trying to encourage, not frighten people. So students, I take the better of the two just in case. But students are required to do this for my tests. This is not optional. They don't have a possibility of doing it. They have to do it. I also require a reflection. So they also have to answer the question, what went wrong on the test? And why did you pick this question? Right? So they need to stop and think about what they've done and how it works. A lot of the time, I did this question because it was worth the most marks. Right? That happens. And that's fine. You know, I don't get into it. But people have very good reflection sometimes. They realize they've fundamentally missed something. They realize they haven't judged how to use their time appropriately. These are things that they can really take with them when they're going to go forward. One I have not done yet, but I really love is the 1-minute survey. You have a class, ask everyone at the end of class, just spend a minute, write down what was important in this class, right? Just the big ideas. Or maybe write down a question. If you missed something, if you didn't get something, write that down. Have everyone hand them in. Mark them or don't mark them. I've heard both strategies work. If you mark them with a check. Yes, I've read this or not. It's just a matter of you get a bit of the pulse of the students. Right? It's not a heavy investment. It doesn't take you a lot of time. Something you can sort of flick through, right? Not a big deal. But hopefully, you'll be able to see if something fundamental is going wrong in your classroom. If you don't feel like doing it every day, do it once a week. Do it once a month. Do it somehow. But it's cheap, and it's easy, and it's fast. Someone who's done this incredibly, much more in depth, Rick Golding in physics. He uses QR codes. Every student gets a QR code. He does a really nice job of people being able to, like, here's a question on the fly. I need you to hand it in 5 minutes. Or alternatively, surveys. Very, very good. You should talk to Rick. Great thing. Be sympathetic. I was originally, so I talked to people about this talk, and I said, I'll tell people to act sympathetic. And they said, no, you should tell them to be sympathetic. And I said, well, I don't care if they are sympathetic. I mean, but I honestly believe that if you appear sympathetic to students, give people their say, listen to them, and respond, people will like you more. They will be more receptive. Hopefully, they'll be more engaging, and they will allow the opportunity for something transformative. You can still say no, right? And that's something people forget, right? If you're nice and you're sympathetic and you listen to students and they say, whatever pet has died and why that was a major problem for them, you didn't hand in your assignment because your pet died. Sure, okay. one of our assignments, my assignment is worth like less than 1% of your grade. You let something like that slide, woof, who cares, right? It doesn't affect the student fundamentally. You know, well, why should it bother me if they had something in their life happened that screwed them up for a bit? Be sympathetic, right? Assume people are telling you the truth, right? Why assume that they're you know, giving you a, even if it starts to reek like, you know, week-old fish, you know, let people get away with it. Like, what's the big savings that you get by catching someone? Aha! That was a lie! There's no, it doesn't make me feel any better when it happens to me. And as I said, the nice thing about being sympathetic is you can still say no. If someone comes in and says, you know, I had a flat tire and I didn't know who to call, and that's why I missed my midterm, you can say, oh, God, that's really rough. If I was here from someplace, you know, and I didn't know people who to call, that would be very hard. You know, but I can't write that off. It's too big. It's too big of an ask. It's too much of whatever. You can tell people no and be sympathetic. They're not exclusive. You don't need to just harden your heart to be able to refuse student requests. You can do it and still hand them tissues. Right? They're not exclusive things. And very, very low cost, like I say. And if you can't do it, fake it. Right? I mean, it's the appearance. Right? I don't know what's happening in anyone's mind, right? So that's it for me. Thanks very much.
Hi, Dr. Dyer. Thank you for your talk. That was informative. My question to you is, I believe that students need to get something from class that they wouldn't necessarily obtain from the notes or the book. So aside from the interaction that you have with them, what do you bring to your lectures, your class, that they wouldn't get otherwise?
Yeah, I give that one. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
My name is Anna Kadigapi. I'm with the nursing faculty.
Hey, thanks very much for the question. So my hope is insight, right? And that's the difference, right? I mean, I taught a distance course last fall, first time I've ever done it. I hated it. I missed that interaction, and I had been involved with preparing the material for the distance course. There was lots of lectures and notes and problems and that kind of stuff. But it's when you look out at the class, you can stop and see none of these guys are getting what I'm talking about. I have got to try to explain this in a different way. The old thing of if someone is so brave enough to actually put up their hand and ask a question, that you know that half the class has the same question. Something has been missed, something hasn't clicked, something hasn't worked, and so 100% absolutely, that's what I think I bring, right? I have that possibility of interaction, that I can try to grant some insight, and I can maybe try to share some of the insight that I have. And that I thought I did a great job, in the course notes, by picking the right book, by doing whatever. But, I mean, I don't know what it's like in any other discipline. I certainly don't know what it's like in nursing. But I will tell you that reading math is hard. I mean, and that's as a professional mathematician. I find it hard. And so I totally would expect my students to find it hard. So I would try to help them with that.
Hi, Dr. Dyer. My name is Tom Cooper. I'm faculty business. I love the transformative low cost. Low cost for me. Hey, there you go. Can you apply those both, do you think, to your larger classrooms as well as your smaller classrooms? I could see how they would work really well in terms of your larger classes, but like even not, I know the class of 2 is probably an outlier, but the class of 6 and maybe 10, et cetera, when you're doing something higher level, can you do those kind of low cost transformative ideas for those ones?
Well, I mean, so I've listed 3, right? And of the 3, I think be sympathetic, absolutely, right? One of my favorite things now is when someone says something like, I slept in, my alarm didn't go off, I missed the midterm, Now, we can ask them to perjure themselves and self-declare as sick, right? One of the most ludicrous policies in the world, right? A policy which, anyone here from economics will say, gives you an incentive to lie, right? Or what I try to do is I try to cut people deals. I say, well, okay, you slept in. That was terrible. You shouldn't do that. But if you hand in the rest of the material for the rest of the semester, make sure you write any other midterms, et cetera, boom, I will drop this test for you. One off, cut you a deal. That's it, right? So can you still be sympathetic? Absolutely. You can totally be sympathetic. That's an easy one. 1 minute summary? Yeah, sure. I mean, at least the stuff I teach in mathematics, there was a point to today's lecture. I was doing something. There was a big theorem. Something is happening. So I think you could definitely do that in a small class. Revision and resubmission, the biggest problem I have with this is the bookkeeping of marking all of it, making sure that the right question gets stuck on the end of the right midterm at the end of it, that I cross out the right mark and replace it with the correct mark afterwards. I think any of those could happen in a big class. My hope is it makes it easier, right? I sometimes get to do wacky and goofy stuff. I don't get to do as much active learning in higher level classes in mathematics. That's the big thing that happens with me. So the working on problems, we spend a lot of time in a senior classroom trying to prove some truth. And that might take me half an hour. And I just don't have time, and I couldn't just throw it. Now, okay, guys, you guys do it. Newton has said, like, if I've seen farther than others, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants, right? I'm no Newton, right? If I came across this stuff fresh, I couldn't struggle through it, let alone the people I'm trying to lead through, right? Mathematicians, right? We're a collection of tricks that worked, right? That's how mathematics is, right? And I'm trying to pass on this trick. We don't pass on the duds, right? We say, this one worked. You are going to like this one, right? So I can't get them to do active things normally, but I can do most of the rest of it. So I'm optimistic, yeah. I think they should be portable. I would say the 1 minute summaries, there's been a lot of sort of studies that show post-testing works well. And I kind of think of this as a method of post-testing, right? That you talk about something, then you immediately get someone to do something with it. They have much better retention. Whether they have better synthesis, I couldn't imagine. But at least when it comes to sort of facts, when you have to use it right after you do it, it really pays off. I'll take questions till they stop me, right? I'm not picky, but I assume you guys have a timeline, right? Fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone.